Hey, deserving listeners, this is Chapter 3 in our deep dive on contemporary Nazis or neo-Nazis or other related groups of people like neo-fascists, white nationalists, KKK members, and others. Of course, as always with this series, there's a major trigger warning in every episode, this one included, because we're going to watch some videos of some difficult events, like the events that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia. So actually, I thought we would start with that after I introduce the podcast. My name is Dr. Kirk and Humberto. I'm a therapist and a professor. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast.
My name is Humberto Castañeda. I train iguanas on riding bicycles, mostly.
So this video is disturbing, and we watched the beginning of this video. It was provided on Vice. It's called Charlottesville, Race and Terror, and we watched the beginnings of the Unite the Right footage that they had on this video, in which neo-Nazis and neo-Confederates and white nationalists and KKK far-right militias got together, seemingly emboldened by Donald Trump being elected. And they had been planning it for a long time. They had a night march with these tiki torches, which Humberto promises to explain the significance of tiki torches. And also we watched interviews with some of the key members, and it was pretty disturbing. And we just left off with David Duke being interviewed. And so now it's after the main march. I think it's the next day. And there are counter-protesters there, people on our side, people on the side of right, I would say, on the side of morality and of the American way of freedom and equality and non-hate. And they were peacefully gathering together. In the video, it doesn't look like they're attacking anyone, not that that would justify violence of this sort against them. And they're at an intersection, they're on a road, and this car just plows through the crowd and ends up hitting other cars that were trying to make their way through this. It's like a town. It's not really like a city, but it's like a town, inner town street. Yeah. There were a couple cars that were getting bogged down in the crowd, and then this car just comes flying in at, I don't know how fast, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. And within the span of like half a second or a second, hits like 50 people or something, and killing one person. And seriously, critically injuring a few others. Yeah, I mean, the injured...
It's a miracle that it was one person dead.
Yeah, because the other thing is that I didn't know until I watched this footage that he hit the car, he hit a car, and then that car hit another car, and there were people in between those cars.
Yeah.
And then that front car also hit people and ran over people. So, it was like three cars running over people. So, again, trigger warning.
Imagine how horrified you are if you're in one of those. I don't know if the people in those cars were which side or whatever. But imagine you're in a car and you're just sitting there, and because someone is aggressively pushing you with their car, you are now hitting pedestrians.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do. You're like trying to stop it, hit the brakes, whatever.
Yeah, you would wonder, are people going to blame me?
Yeah.
So let's watch this. So first off, I didn't know or note that the park or the neighborhood is called Emancipation Park. They just showed that.
I didn't catch that. Wow.
Yeah, every time I see this, it's chilling, and I don't know. In my head, I remember it in a certain way, but every time I see it, it's so psychopathic to just run people over at that speed. And also, thank God there were cars in front, because I think he was intending...
Oh, no, that was going to be worse. Absolutely.
He was going to run over 10 times more people because the area was packed. And the other thing is, because the crowd is on a flat street, none of them can see what's happening. So there's an aerial shot, and I'm like, oh my God, get out of the way. And there's people like, what? Because you wouldn't know what was happening. And so people wouldn't have gotten out of the way necessarily. But and the people are getting crushed between the cars. And
whenever you think of the human body as being, like attacked by something metal and large, you realize how fragile humans are, or animals in general, let alone humans. And so, it's just the sadness in my head is that again, I keep coming back to this thing, like that person driving that car used to be a little child that would not have thought, oh, one day I'll grow up and I will plow my vehicle into human beings with the intent to kill them, and hopefully I'll kill a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does raise a question as to what were the factors that contributed to this behavior. And it's impossible for us to say with much certainty, because with any human behavior, we have a hard time with that. In all likelihood, what you're saying is relevant in that he isn't likely a psychopath, because it's not a common disorder,
Yeah.
but he might be. So he might have actually, when he was young, had fantasies either due to sadism or abuse or psychopathy or all the above to harm others. But we're talking on the order of 1% of the human population. So in all likelihood, he has the same heart and compassion and empathy and capacity for altruism that everyone else has. But because of the indoctrination and whatever else led him to this way of thinking, whatever led him to being susceptible to the cult of white supremacy. Yeah. So, and we'll get more into that in future.
He starts basically feeling that this is such a threat, such an existential threat, that all rules are out the door and they have no choice but to go and try to kill as many as he can with the car.
Right, because he wasn't trying to get away with it. It's his car and his face.
Yeah.
Were people running up the street screaming and crying. There's many people on the side injured too. It's a really horrific sound.
Yeah, and this footage I hadn't seen before I was reviewing this video of people doing CPR, unconscious people. Yeah. Obviously, that's what would be happening. There's one person dead. There's several people who are critically injured who, without medical attention, probably would have died. You know, a handful of people that were in the hospital for a really long time, maybe permanently injured, disabled, in some ways.
Yeah. Oh, and mentally scarred for life, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, I also wonder about the townspeople of Charlottesville, because they probably have friends, or they might have watched the footage. They might have been there.
Yeah.
And, you know, you just wonder what the community has gone through.
Yeah, that's a great point, because, you know, every life is surrounded by a network, right?
Yeah.
And this was many lives affected deeply. And in, like you said, not a large New York City or something. It's got to have percolated, and it will continue to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what neo-Nazis, or maybe even right-wingers more generally, will say is, well, you know, in every population you're going to have a weirdo. But how come there are so many of these so-called weirdos that emerge from the neo-Nazi, right-wing militia groups?
So here's a problem, though. Let's say I start a movement, and the movement is anti-giraffe or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, giraffes just got to go, man. They've got to go. I mean, we got to use basically any means necessary, whatever. And we day in, day out, and videos and propaganda, and we march at zoos, and we're always like have, big signs. And then one of our members, or a couple, go and, massacre some giraffes. And then they're interviewing us for our responsibility. And I'm like, well, I mean, every community has some weirdos. What are you talking about? Like, your community was built around doing this. You personally didn't have, I guess, the cojones to go and do it yourself. So one of your members does what you told them to do, and now you're like disavowing it. That's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least own it.
Yeah.
Be like, well, yeah, I mean, this is a good start. Say something like that goes along with what your bullshit is.
Right.
Because otherwise it's like you're not even living up to your own BS.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. A good point. So I also looked up, since this was six and a half years ago, I also looked up some videos about what's the aftermath legally and otherwise. So let's watch some videos about that. So this video is put out by the YouTube channel called Now This News.
What some of the key players of the Unite the Right rally are up to since the event in 2017. Richard Spencer, helped to organize Unite the Right rally, has reportedly pulled back from the movement after a failed 2018 alt-right rally, was found liable in 2021 and forced to pay millions. James Fields Jr. drove car into crowd, murdering Heather Heyer and injuring others, pleaded guilty to 29 hate crimes and received a life sentence in federal court, and then a second life sentence plus 419 years after being found guilty of Heyer's murder, ordered to pay $12 million to victims of his attack. Matthew Heimbach.
So the first person they reviewed was one of the key players in the Unite the Right rally. Apparently, he pulled back from this sort of activity because he had a rally in 2018, probably trying to have it at least be as big, if not bigger. And since it wasn't very big, he is switching modes or gears or roads for himself. And what does that tell you? Or what does that possibly tell you?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, that sounds a bit hopeful. Like maybe there isn't enough groundswell for them to keep growing. So that's good. One thing that does scare me a bit is that they can easily just be online and kind of keep going with their hate message online and grow online without us seeing it. Because like, at least when they're rallying, we can count heads and see photos. When they're just talking in chat rooms that we're not monitoring, who knows how many there are and how much they're growing, what they're planning. So, but yeah, I mean, at the very least, it is. I am somewhat hopeful by the fact that because what is the alternative would have been like now they've continued having more rallies and they're getting bigger.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's important to highlight that when it happened in 2017 and other things that were happening at the time, the worry was, oh my God.
This is the start.
Yeah. It's just going to get worse and worse. But according to some metrics, at least this, it had a peak because Donald Trump gets elected with racist rhetoric, and that emboldens other people. And the way that Twitter was maybe at the time, it was probably less moderated. I don't know about now, but Facebook, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Facebook and Instagram and these other platforms were not moderating as much as they try to do now.
Oh, definitely. I don't know the transition years, but absolutely. Like, well, first of all, most of the moderation in the early years of all these platforms was human, right? And then they started introducing some automated moderation. Nowadays, most of the moderation is automated. And with AI, like they can actually pick out things really well and quickly. And I have to imagine, so I don't know exactly, but I have to imagine that for sure things like this and events that were broadcast on their platforms triggered a lot of increased scrutiny. And so I'm imagining that today you can't do half as what you could do 5 years ago.
Right, because I remember not too long ago, before these events, that the prevailing wisdom or sentiment, even among liberals, was, well, freedom of speech. Yeah. And if they're on Discord, if they're on Twitter, hey, I mean, it's America. Say what you want to say. But when it leads to violence and death, and none of us are saying, yeah, we need the voice of neo-Nazis in our society, and then it crosses a line. And of course, those laws were in place prior as well. But the way in which those laws or the cultural movements to push back against certain speech, it shifts over time. And one of the ways that it shifts is when things like this happen, right?
Yeah, and the eternal miscommunication around free speech is that the main part of the free speech, the first article is not like, it's not, hey, every time you want to open your mouth in any context or type something, you're always allowed to do it no matter what. No. The point is the government should not restrict it.
Meaning that if you were to criticize the government,
right,
they can't restrict it in the way that other governments.
Yeah. And even with that, there are still some restrictions because there are still some allowed restrictions because the government will limit your ability to do things that will lead to direct harm, like the famous example being the fire in a crowded theater, right? But there's actually that's not the only case. That's not like the one exception. So already that's true. But then when you get to a private company saying what you can or cannot say on their servers, that's completely different. And what's the recourse we have as people? You don't have to use their platform if you don't want.
Right. It's like when people email in to us,
Yeah.
I will select emails or comments to talk about on the podcast. Is that me limiting free speech? Yeah, it is. Because if someone wrote in something that was ridiculous or an idea I didn't want to promote or was hateful in some way, then yeah.
Yeah, but they can go post it elsewhere. They can do anything they want. Right. An example is kind of flash forwarding a little bit.
My point is that, we're a company, like Twitter's a company or
and
Facebook.
we get to decide that.
Yeah.
Just flash forwarding a little bit. Do you know of the documentary called Night at the Garden?
No.
Okay, so I won't spoil it. We'll talk about it. But one of the interesting things is that there was a big controversy before World War II because there were, Nazi sympathizers here in this country that were trying to do rallies and things, right? And there was a big controversy about, well, is freedom of speech, should they be allowed and stuff like that? But someone pointed out at the time that part of it is like, what's the venue that they're allowed to have? What's the platform that they're allowed to have? So as an example, yes, you are free to go to certain public parks and say, I hate mice, I hate camels, whatever you want to do, like that, right? You still can't go there and start like threatening to kill people. But
what's up with you and animals?
I know, I just hate animals. But here's the thing that we're not under obligation as a government or as a people to hire a crew to go film you and actually broadcast it worldwide and put you in Madison Square Garden or something. Like, we're not under obligation to amplify your platform just because you want to say something. And those are misunderstandings. So I think, absolutely, these companies not only should, they have it's their duty to be responsible.
Yeah, be responsible. Right, because you're responding to the right-wing individuals that'll say that Google is breaking constitutional law by restricting certain speech on their platform or Facebook or whatever.
And the counter being the Twitter situation.
Yeah.
It's we got free speech. That's why I got to let Alex Jones back on.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, I'm not a legal expert, but I have heard from legal experts that argue that Twitter has become the new town square, and thus it's kind of like a public good.
It's a private company.
Totally. but
it's not even publicly owned.
Right.
It's not publicly traded.
But I've heard that argument, and I don't know if it holds any sort of water, and it probably hasn't necessarily been tested at higher courts, but it is an interesting question. I don't like it.
Well, but a public square would, by definition, not be owned by someone. You wouldn't go into someone's property and declare that that's the public square.
Yeah.
Do you know that all the data in Twitter, because when Musk took over, he shut down the API access, so no one outside can use the data from Twitter to do anything with it. And they're using all the data from Twitter to train their own AI models in their own way, and no one else has access to that stuff. And so to me, it's like, not only is it not a true public square, but essentially, and by the way, I have no problem. I actually think it's fine if he wants to allow Alex Jones and Trump, whoever he wants. I just go back to like, we don't have to patron it. And I encourage everyone to get the hell off of Twitter.
Well, it's easy for you and I to say because we don't use Twitter.
No,
but for some people, particularly journalists and others, I've heard from them because I don't understand. I've never understood Twitter. I've never used Twitter, or I should say I barely use Twitter because people were always saying, you have a podcast, you need to be on Twitter. That's the big thing. And I'd be like, okay. And so I would sort of mail it in for a while. But I have heard from people that it's like, they'll say, it's not that easy to just say, I'm not going to use Twitter. There's not a viable alternative.
Zero sympathy. Zero sympathy.
I normally wouldn't, but when I hear them talk,
but what's the line? What is the thing that they would have to do? Because they've already been anti-Semitic. They've led people on like Alex Jones. Alex Jones, he led him back on. All that stuff. Where is the line? What is the thing they would have to do? But when it's like, okay, finally, my convenience is no longer important enough for me to keep supporting.
Yeah, and to be
bullshit.
clear about Alex Jones, he isn't just like a minor problem. For years and years on various platforms, including Twitter, I assume, he was spouting lie after lie after lie, and some of those lies were saying that the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting was a false flag operation, and the parents and the police and the journalists were all in on it as a way to be against guns.
Control us, and take our guns away.
Take our guns away. And Alex Jones was participating in either indirectly or directly doxing, meaning that publishing how to contact these parents. The parents, the Sandy Hook shooting happened 12 years ago.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. Still to this day, these parents, these innocent people who lost their precious little
babies,
children to a shooter and might not have even been publicly speaking about their experiences. They were just trying to live their lives, and siblings of the kids as well. The whole, thousands and thousands, maybe millions of douchebags who follow Alex Jones are believing this shit and also going after these people, harassing them, death threats. I think even showing up at their homes and making threats. And I don't know. I'm speaking from memory, but take it from me as someone who's on the internet and occasionally gets this kind of, compared to that, it's very limited, but I do get some of that attention, and it is terrifying. It's like there's nothing you can do about it. You go to sleep at night and you can have all the security measures in the world, and if someone really wanted to get you, then they're going to get you. As soon as I leave the house and go to the store, they can, it's terrifying. And to, and not only just these lies, but they were, what Alex Jones was saying was these parents are not just going along, they are part of the cabal of evil that is bringing us all down. They might even be lizard people that smell like sulfur because they have spiritual connections to the underworld. They're literally, this is what he was talking about, and people believed him, and he knew it. He knew they were lies.
Of course he did.
And he was, and that's why he was successfully sued.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk lets him back on Twitter.
And by the way, Elon Musk's the one that kicked him off precisely because of the Sandy Hook stuff, because Elon Musk was saying, hey, I lost a child. I held him in my arms as he was dying. I can't stand by this. This is too much. This is too far. So he kicked him off. This was a year ago or whatever. And then now he's like, well, if we're going to be a platform, he did a vote. He said, well, who wants me to let Alex Jones back on? And of course the majority of the Twitter patrons right now are simpatico to his side. So
of the people that follow Elon Musk.
But he, what he does, right? He artificially boosts this thing, so like almost everyone follows him.
Okay.
But anyways, the point is that the poll came out like 80% let him back on.
Which I can't imagine if it was even a real poll of, a real sample of Twitter users. I can't imagine it would be 80%. That's ridiculous.
Right. That would be surprising.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he let him back on.
Because even right-wing idiots aren't necessarily in love with Alex Jones.
And again, I want to be clear. I don't think that there's anything technically wrong or illegal with him letting Alex Jones back on. It's his company. Yeah. He can do whatever the heck he wants as long as it is legal. I just, myself, will definitely not be patroning, and I encourage others not to. And that's it.
Yeah. It's upsetting.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's any consolation, Twitter does seem to be struggling.
Yeah, they've lost. That was the other thing, is that he turned off more and more advertisers than he told them to F off and stuff. But his play right now, I think, as much as I dislike the guy, and I think he's an ultimate con artist, and he lies, and I can't believe the SEC hasn't actually. Anyways, all that's true. But man, the guy is somehow able to keep spinning his plates, and so what he's got going is he's training his AI exclusively on the Twitter data, and he sees way more value on that than the ad dollars. That's why he doesn't care about the ad dollar. He sort of doesn't care about the ad dollars. So and he sees the value of the AI as being way more powerful for his future plans. As you know, he owns all these other companies, so he sees it all interconnected because he's building robots, and anyways.
People have been asking us to do a deep dive on Elon Musk, and I would actually
we should do it.
I actually like to do that because I think at first I thought there wouldn't be much to say, because how do you evaluate someone's psychology based on business deals? But he is fairly self-disclosing.
Yeah.
And I think it reflects not just Elon Musk, but also a lot of online turns for even just regular people, the ways in which things can happen online that can cause us to go and maybe down a road of becoming a neo-Nazi. So let's continue watching this video on Now This News, titled Where the Key Players of the Unite the Right rally Are Now.
Nicholas Fuentes, former student who became an outspoken alt-right influencer since Unite the Right, leader of the America First Political Action Committee. Built a huge audience on YouTube and DLive, was eventually deplatformed from YouTube, DLive, and Twitter. Christopher Cantwell, popular face of the Unite the Right rally, charged with 3 felony assault charges from his role in the rally, and has faced a series of legal troubles since, ultimately plea bargained down to misdemeanor convictions in July 2018. Currently in prison for interstate threats he made to another neo-Nazi.
What is DLive?
There must be another platform. I don't know.
DLive.
DLive.
I've never heard of it before.
I actually only heard about it because of this guy, because of Fuentes.
DLive. Yeah. Your stream, your rules.
Yeah. I think it's like a
streaming
winger kind of.
Okay. So like Twitch for D-bags. Okay. So what do you know about this? I don't know anything about this person.
Well, yeah. So like they were saying, he's a quote influencer. Basically, he got started by he if you see him, he has this like, he looks very young, like someone who just started college kind of thing, or even a senior in high school. And he comes off as kind of mild-mannered and sort of nice, but then his speech, his talk is complete like white supremacist nationalist conversation. And then he'll deny being like what you were saying in the other episode about how a KKK guy might be like, oh, we're not racist. Like he'll do BS like that, but I mean, his ideology is absolutely that. He was one of the people hanging around with Kanye for a bit, like as an example. There was an infamous thing with Marjorie Taylor Greene at a event, at one of these events that Nick Fuentes was holding, and then she's like up there on stage, and then she tried to like distance herself from it because he's like kind of a toxic figure. And
wow, she tried to distance herself.
Yeah, think about that. Marjorie Taylor's like, well, I didn't know who he was.
Wow,
I didn't know who he was, even though like she was on stage with them, like they were. It's BS. Like, of course she knew who he was.
Right.
And of course, like she believes in a lot, maybe not literally everything, but a lot of what he believes. He's a Holocaust denier. He's, like everything you want, like it's in there. And then he'll try to minimize a lot of the stuff, say, oh, he's been misrepresented. But there's quotes on video of him saying most of the things that you would want to accuse him of.
Yeah.
So one of the things that concerns me is that, as you know, and I'll talk about this a bit in another section, prisons are not healthy when it comes to calming down racial divisions and things like that. So a lot of these folks that have been sent to prison, which of course, great to get them off the streets, get them off of like organizing these situations. And yet they're, depending on what, some of them might have seen the light, but the ones that don't, which are maybe likely a lot of them, especially if now they have grievances and things like this, they could be helping radicalize more. Plus there's a huge network of white power in prisons. And so, yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, as we'll discuss, Hitler's prison stint was a catalyst for everything that was to come.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll get into it later, but it's a microcosm for society, how fear induces divide and in-group, out-group behavior. We've understood that for decades. So it sounds like that lead figure in the Unite the Right rally is in prison for having threatened another neo-Nazi group.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
That you would have that, because of course you would. These individuals are, one, ideologically narrow, because
right.
Some groups believe this nuance and some groups believe this nuance.
Right.
And also they're so problematic personality-wise
sure.
that sharing or collaborating, to collaborate, you have to be able to collaborate. You have to be able to play nice.
Collaborate and listen.
You have to listen.
Yeah.
And I guess it would lead to that. And also, if you're just overflowing with rage and looking for an excuse to attack someone, then the people closest to you are probably going to get most of the victimization. And
that's true. And one thing that comes to mind is I was referencing this interview that I saw with a KKK Grand Wizard. It's an old interview from like the 70s. But in there, they were asking him, like, well, so, there's all these neo-Nazis. And the guy goes, we don't like Nazis either. Like, we don't like commies. We don't like Nazis. We don't like, which is very interesting, right? Because you'd think like, whoa, but wait a minute. Shouldn't you guys be like, oh, buddy, buddy? Now, I don't know about right now, but this was like this one dude in that interview. But it is very much like, no, because we're like this this narrow, and they're like this narrow, and we don't really want to intersect. Because also the time period, the 70s was probably still pretty recent, like anti-Nazi fervor.
Well, a lot of the guys who probably were in KKK
might have,
served in the war.
Or their dad, or someone did, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was interesting that they're like, ideologies are very compatible, and yet like no, we don't like Nazis either.
Yeah. I mean, if you just walked up to one of these even just far right leaning individuals and said, what do you think about adopting a European governmental structure, they would say, oh my God,
no,
that's just like the worst, most horrible thing you can think of.
Oh yeah, like Nordic, like like the Nordic countries, like Finland, Norway, and stuff, with full of like the pure Aryan race. Don't you want something like that? No, they're socialist communists.
Yeah. And yet they are literally adopting a European governmental structure called the National Socialist, whatever, blah, 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 Nazi. So in this next video, it's a bit of a longer one, but I think it's worth watching because I think it made me feel better. And that last video kind of makes me feel better, although Fuentes is still at large.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Fuentes hasn't, killed people or injured people and stuff.
And Fuentes has been deplatformed.
He's an ideologue.
Has been deplatformed.
He's been deplatformed.
Yeah, which is a big deal, right? Because there's not a lot of people that will follow them to the D-Lives or whatever, And
even D-Live deplatformed him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so.
All right. But in this video...
And I should say, I don't know enough about D-Live. Maybe I'm maligning. I had heard of them only in connection with Nick Fuentes. And so my impression was that they were more like right-leaning, but I don't know. Either way, he's been deplatformed by a lot of the main stuff.
Right.
I wonder if he's still off of Twitter or if he was let back on. Technically, he should be let back on Twitter.
Yeah. So this next video is on MSNBC, the YouTube channel. It's an interview with documentarians who looked into the whole Charlottesville Unite the Right trial cases. So let's watch.
Which is still on fire. We're being thrown in our direction.
Was premises bashed through our group with their shields?
I heard the sound of metal hitting bodies.
I've been a litigator in New York City for more than 2 decades. Charlottesville actually shocked me. I wanted the toughest possible people to help expose that. This was really a conspiracy.
It wasn't some sort of freak accident where this car ran into people.
There was overt planning how to prepare for violence and make this appear as if it's self-defense.
The threat.
So that was that bit that I don't know if they're just playing with the edit of this documentary called No Accident on HBO Max. They're implying that the car attack was planned to some extent.
That is a look at the new HBO documentary titled No Accident. The film chronicles the successful efforts to sue the organizers of the deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. And that's when things turned deadly. A rally participant drove his car through the group, injuring dozens and killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer. The driver eventually would be convicted of first-degree murder. You will recall that is the rally that prompted then-President Trump to insist there were, quote, very fine people on both sides. Joining us now, the attorney.
So this is Morning Joe on MSNBC, and a little correction: there were protesters there the night of the rally.
Yeah,
he said, the next day counter protesters arrived. Counter protesters were there en masse from the beginning. And I don't know about this event, but I've heard from other journalists that will say that typically what the news coverage will focus on are, in a situation like this, would be the neo-Nazis, right? And the counter-protesters will be highlighted a little bit, but that's not as interesting often as the neo-Nazis footage would be. And the interviews will be at the neo-Nazis and maybe 1 or 2 interviews with the counter-protesters. And what the journalists were saying was that often at these events, there's like 10, 20, 30, 100 times more counter-protesters than there are.
And you don't see that.
Right.
Yeah.
And it makes it look like there's this huge problem. And of course, if you're the news company, it services you for clicks and ads and watching if you freak people out and have a story to tell. if the story is there's, 30 some odd neo-Nazis and 1,000 normal people, then it's not an interesting story. You have 1,000 normal people and 30 weirdos that are dressing up in cosplay and masks and walking around, and they're not very articulate. It doesn't cause fear, but that is often the case. I mean, that's probably exaggerated, 30 and 1,000, but I think that's another thing to highlight, that how news plays a role in causing the problem, because you can imagine a neo-Nazi or someone who's kind of on the fence, especially if someone's traumatized looking for an in-group to fall in with, that you would be attracted to the neo-Nazis if it's portrayed in a certain way. Or if you're in the neo-Nazi group and you see the footage, you would say, hey, that's exactly what we were looking for. We're looking for free advertising about how strong we are and how much life we have and how much power we have. Whereas if they just focused on the reality of it and kind of humiliate, it's sort of like with the WTO protest in Seattle. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
It was WTO, right?
Yeah. World Trade Organization.
And it was what was it? They had a phrase. It was the Battle of Seattle.
Was that the Battle of Seattle? Yeah, I guess that was the Battle of Seattle.
Like 2004 or something, 2000 or something. It was around there somewhere.
No, it was later than that, because was it before the market collapse of 08?
1999.
Oh my God, what?
Yeah.
Wait, the WTO thing was in 99?
Yeah. I knew it was a long time ago.
Before even 9/11?
Yeah. Were you living in Seattle at the time?
No, by then I was living on the east side.
Oh, okay. East side meaning east side of the lake,
Yeah.
which is very near Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously knew it was happening, but I can't believe that was the year The Matrix came out.
So I lived in Seattle proper and actually didn't live that far from the protests, but people from all over were calling me and asking me if everything was okay. And whenever I would meet someone outside Seattle for the next few years, they'd be like, oh, Battle of Seattle, like how, what happened? And I'd say, so the protests took place in the span of like maybe 2 blocks downtown. And then there was another incident that happened up on Capitol Hill as it was dispersing up to Capitol Hill. And yeah, on those 2 blocks, it was
chaos.
It was kind of hairy.
Yeah.
But it was just 2 blocks, and there are tens of thousands of blocks.
Yeah.
But
the coverage sure made it look like it was
Yeah.
siege of the city.
Yeah, it looked like, and I guess more recently during the pandemic, Black Lives Matter protests after George Floyd,
Capitol Hill.
you had the Chad or the Chaz or the Chud or whatever they were calling it, and it was broadcast particularly on right-wing Fox News outlets about how Seattle had just descended into chaos. Again, 2 blocks. There's a Seattle police precinct right there on Capitol Hill. I think it's right on Pine or Pike. And then a street off from that by the park, by Anderson Park, I think it's called, was designated as a free police zone because they had overrun the police precinct. It's a small little precinct. And the rest of the city, which arguably is 99.99999% of the city, it was business as usual.
Right.
So similarly, with the neo-Nazis, you just wonder about the effect that sort of, if it bleeds, it leads, broadcasting. You just wonder if that has an effect on things.
It does. And because like the flip side of it is that once again, the early protests and attempts by Hitler's party, wasn't the Nazis yet, they were small. And they were not successful. and then, by the way, they ran in so many elections that they lost. So it cuts both ways. On the one hand, absolutely, you're right. Like the media helps, and in fact, that's what Hitler knew so well. That propaganda is the key, right? So like the media helps amplify things, and boost signal on one way and not another, and that is a problem. And at the same time, it's also true that just because things are small doesn't mean they can't become a huge problem. So, but I think you're right. Like, imagine how important or useful it would be if in something like those protests they spent a lot of time talking to the protesters, showing that the majority of the country is not with this.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, today it's even worse because
Yeah.
the TikTokification of our lives to these 1 or 2 minute clips doesn't help. So, Berto, let's take a break here. And the rest of this episode will just be for patrons of the podcast. And I believe that we're going to get into more politics, Donald Trump, this kind of stuff, and also maybe some good news that I can share with everybody about Charlottesville. Yeah. Not that there's a silver lining, but that
some hope
for our country and society. So if you want to hear the rest, become a patron of the podcast by going to patreon.com. Otherwise, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.